The bullet tore through the saloon window, just as Emma Thorne was pouring coffee for the miners at table 6, and the explosion of glass sent her diving beneath the nearest table before her mind could even register what had happened. Lucas Fletcher stormed through the batwing doors 3 seconds later, his Colt drawn and his face darker than a summer thunderstorm rolling across the Utah desert, and he was shouting something about claim jumpers and thieves loud enough to shake dust from the rafters. Emma pressed herself against the saloon wall, her entire body trembling, coffee soaking through her apron as the shattered pot lay in pieces at her feet, and she could feel her breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with the stray bullet and everything to do with the volume of that angry male voice filling the room. Lucas holstered his gun when he realized the man he was chasing had already fled out the back, and he turned to survey the damage, his chest still heaving with righteous anger. That was when he saw her. The new girl who had arrived in St. George just 2 weeks prior, the one with the honey-colored hair and quiet demeanor who kept her eyes down and never spoke unless spoken to. She was crouched against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself, and even from across the room, he could see the way she was shaking, but it was her face that stopped him cold. She was not looking at the broken window or the spilled coffee or the startled patrons. She was looking directly at him with an expression he had seen before on spooked horses and wounded animals, an expression that spoke of old fears and older pain. "Everybody all right?" Lucas asked, and he noticed how Emma flinched again at his voice, even though he had brought it down several notches from his earlier roar. He watched her close her eyes and take a breath, watched her force herself to stand on legs that did not seem entirely steady, watched her smooth her apron with hands that trembled. "Fine, everyone is fine," the saloon owner, Mr. Donnelly, said, coming out from behind the bar with a broom. "Though you have got yourself a window to pay for, Fletcher, and that coffee set was not cheap either." Lucas nodded absently, already reaching for his wallet, but his eyes stayed on Emma as she bent to pick up the pieces of the shattered coffee pot. She kept her head down, her movements careful and precise, and she did not look in his direction again. He had never paid much attention to her before, beyond noting that she was pretty in a delicate sort of way, and that she worked hard without complaint. Now he found himself cataloging other details. The way she held her shoulders as if expecting a blow, the careful distance she maintained from the male customers, the fact that he had never once heard her laugh in the 2 weeks she had been working here. Lucas paid for the damages and left the saloon without another word, but he could not shake the image of her face from his mind. He had grown up rough in the Utah territory, the son of a ranch hand who drank too much and a mother who died when he was 12. He knew what fear looked like when it had been beaten into someone, knew it the way he knew the land and the sky and the feel of a horse beneath him. And Emma Thorne had that kind of fear written all over her. He did not see her again until 3 days later when he came into town for supplies. She was at the general store, carefully counting coins from a small purse, and the shopkeeper was showing her fabric samples for a new dress. Lucas heard himself speak before he had consciously decided to approach. "Afternoon, Miss Thorne," he said, and he kept his voice low and even, the way he would speak to a green-broke colt. She still startled, but this time she managed to meet his eyes for just a second before looking away. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, and her voice was softer than morning mist. "I wanted to apologize for the commotion the other day," Lucas continued. "I should not have come storming in like that. It was not proper behavior, especially with ladies present." Emma's fingers tightened on the fabric she was holding, a pretty blue calico that matched her eyes. "You had every right to be angry. Someone shot at you." "Maybe so, but that does not give me the right to frighten innocent people." He shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how large he was compared to her, how his presence might seem threatening in the confined space of the shop. He took a deliberate step backward, giving her more room to breathe. "I hope you were not too shaken up." "I am fine," Emma said, but the words came out too quickly, too practiced. Lucas recognized a well-worn lie when he heard one. Still, he did not press. He simply tipped his hat and moved to the other side of the store to give her space. But he found himself watching her reflection in the shop window as she completed her purchase. She moved like someone who had learned to make herself small, to take up as little space as possible, and it made something twist in his chest. St. George in the summer of 1883 was a growing town, full of Mormon settlers and miners and cowboys passing through on their way to somewhere else. Lucas had been working the Fletcher ranch since he was 16, and when his father finally drank himself to death 2 years ago, Lucas inherited the land and the debts that came with it. He was 24 now and owned 300 acres of decent grazing land northwest of town, along with 40 head of cattle and 2 horses he had broken himself. It was not much, but it was his, and he took pride in it. Emma remained a mystery to him over the following weeks, but he found himself increasingly aware of her presence whenever he came to town. He learned that she rented a small room above the general store, that she worked at the saloon 6 days a week, and that she attended church services every Sunday morning without fail. He learned that she never spoke about where she came from or why she had arrived in St. George alone, with nothing but a battered carpet bag and the clothes on her back. He learned that she was 22 years old and that she had hands that were too soft to have done much manual labor before she came here, which suggested some kind of genteel upbringing before whatever had happened to bring her west. It was old Mrs. Whitmore, the unofficial source of all gossip in St. George, who finally gave him some answers one afternoon when he stopped by her boarding house to fix a loose step on her front porch. She paid him an apple pie and information, neither of which he refused. "That poor Thorne girl," Mrs. Whitmore said, shaking her head as she watched Lucas work. "Came all the way from Kansas with nothing but the clothes on her back and fear in her eyes. My niece in Topeka knows the family. The father was a railroad man, mean as a snake when he drank, which was most days. Beat his wife until she died of it when Emma was just 17. Then he turned his attention to Emma herself. Lucas's hammer slipped, and he barely avoided smashing his thumb. Did he? I do not know all the details, and it would not be proper to speculate, Mrs. Whitmore said firmly. But I know that girl saved every penny she could hide until she had enough to buy a train ticket west, and she left in the dead of night without a backward glance. She has been here 2 months now, working herself to the bone to make an honest living, and she has not caused a moment of trouble for anyone." Lucas finished the repair in silence, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He thought about Emma's flinch, about the fear in her eyes when he had stormed into the saloon shouting, and he felt a fury building in his chest that had nowhere to go. The man who had hurt her was hundreds of miles away, possibly dead for all Lucas knew, and even if he was not, what could Lucas do about it? He was just a rancher trying to make a living in the Utah desert. He had no claim on Emma Thorne, no right to feel this protective of a woman he barely knew. But the feeling would not leave him alone, and he found himself modifying his behavior in ways both small and large. When he came to town, he made sure to enter the saloon quietly instead of banging through the doors. When he needed to get someone's attention, he waited until he was close enough to speak in a normal tone instead of shouting across the street. When he saw Emma serving drinks or clearing tables, he made sure to give her plenty of warning before approaching, to move slowly and deliberately so as not to startle her. She noticed. He could tell by the way she began to relax slightly in his presence, by the way she stopped flinching quite so badly when he spoke. It was not much, but it felt like progress. The first real conversation they had lasted all of 5 minutes, but Lucas treasured every second of it. He had come into the saloon one evening in late July, the heat still shimmering off the red rock formations that surrounded St. George, and found Emma wiping down tables in the quiet hour between the dinner crowd and the evening rush. She looked tired, her hair escaping from its pins and her face flushed from the heat. "Evening, Miss Thorne," Lucas said softly as he approached the bar. She looked up and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. "Mr. Fletcher, can I get you something?" "Just water, if you have it. Too hot for whiskey tonight." She poured him a glass from the pitcher, and her hand barely shook at all as she set it in front of him. Lucas counted that as a victory. He drank slowly, trying to think of something to say that would not sound foolish or make her uncomfortable. The silence stretched between them, not entirely awkward, but not exactly comfortable either. "How are you finding St. George?" he finally asked. Emma paused in her wiping, considering the question more carefully than it probably deserved. "It is hot," she said at last. "Much hotter than Kansas, but the people have been kind for the most part. Mrs. Whitmore has been especially helpful." "She is a good woman," Lucas agreed. "Feeds half the town, whether they can pay or not, and never holds it against anyone." "That is a rare quality," Emma said quietly, and something in her voice suggested she had known people who did hold things against others, who kept careful accounting of every debt and grudge. "Your family back in Kansas, do they know where you are?" Lucas asked, then immediately regretted it when he saw her shoulders tense. "I am sorry, that is not my business." "No," Emma said, and for a moment he thought she was agreeing that it was not his business, but then she continued, "No, they do not know where I am, and I prefer it that way. My mother passed several years ago, and my father and I were not on good terms when I left. There is no one else." Lucas heard everything she did not say in those careful words, and he found himself responding with an honesty he rarely showed. "My father died 2 years back. My mother when I was 12. I know something about being alone in the world." Emma met his eyes then, really met them for the first time since they had started talking, and he saw a flicker of understanding pass between them. They were both survivors of difficult childhoods, both trying to build something better from the wreckage they had been left. The moment stretched and held, fragile as spun glass, before Emma looked away and went back to her cleaning. "I should let you get back to work," Lucas said, finishing his water. "Thank you for the drink." "You are welcome, Mr. Fletcher." He left the saloon with a strange warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the July heat. After that, their conversations became more frequent, though never long and never particularly deep. Lucas found excuses to come to town more often, and Emma seemed to find excuses to linger near his table when he was at the saloon. He learned that she liked to read but could rarely afford books, that she had a talent for sewing and mended clothes for extra money, that she dreamed of someday having a little house with a garden where she could grow vegetables and flowers. She learned that he was trying to build up his ranch, that he loved horses more than cattle, but kept cattle because they were more profitable, that he had never been further east than Colorado, and had no particular desire to go back that direction. It was a careful dance they were doing, two wounded people circling each other with equal parts attraction and wariness. Lucas had been with women before, quick encounters with saloon girls that meant nothing, and left him feeling empty afterward. This felt different. Emma was different. She was not someone he could simply bed and forget, and the realization that he wanted more than that, wanted something real and lasting, scared him more than he cared to admit. August arrived with temperatures that made the desert shimmer like water, and with it came trouble in the form of Marcus Vance and his crew. Vance was a big man with bigger ambitions, a rancher from Colorado who had decided to expand his operations into Utah by buying up smaller spreads for pennies on the dollar. When the owners would not sell, accidents had a way of happening. Fences got cut, cattle went missing, water sources got contaminated. Lucas had already turned down 2 offers from Vance, both delivered with a smile that did not reach the man's cold blue eyes. The third offer came on a Thursday afternoon when Lucas was in town picking up supplies, and it was delivered not with a smile but with a threat. Vance cornered him outside the general store, 3 of his men flanking him, and the message was clear. "You are a stubborn man, Fletcher," Vance said, his voice carrying clearly down the street. "But stubbornness only gets a man so far. I am prepared to offer you $500 for your land, and that is more than generous considering the state of your operation." Lucas kept his voice even with an effort. "And I have told you twice already that my land is not for sale at any price. I suggest you look elsewhere for your expansion plans." "I do not think you understand the situation you are in, boy," Vance said, and his voice rose with each word. "You are in debt up to your eyeballs, your cattle are barely making it through the summer, and you have got no help and no prospects. You can take my offer and walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, or you can stay and watch everything you have worked for turn to dust." Lucas felt his own temper rising to match Vance's, felt the familiar heat building in his chest that usually preceded shouting or fists or both. He opened his mouth to tell Vance exactly what he could do with his offer, but then he caught sight of movement in his peripheral vision. Emma had emerged from the general store, a package in her arms, and she had frozen at the sound of raised voices. Even from 10 feet away, Lucas could see the way her face had gone pale, could see her starting to shake. The anger drained out of him as quickly as it had built. He turned back to Vance, but when he spoke, his voice was quiet and controlled. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Vance, but my answer remains no. Now, if you will excuse me, I have business to attend to." He walked away before Vance could respond, before his own temper could get the better of him again. He went directly to Emma, who was still standing frozen in the doorway of the general store, and he spoke as gently as he knew how. "It is all right," he said. "Just a business disagreement, nothing for you to worry about." Emma's eyes searched his face, and he saw the exact moment she registered that he was calm, that he was not going to explode into violence or rage. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, though she was still trembling. "I thought," she started, then stopped and shook her head. "I am sorry. It is foolish." "It is not foolish," Lucas said firmly. "Can I walk you back to your room?" She nodded, and they walked in silence through the dusty streets of St. George, Lucas matching his long strides to her shorter ones. When they reached the stairs that led up to her room above the general store, Emma turned to face him. "Thank you," she said, "for walking with me, and for—" She trailed off, clearly struggling to put words to what she wanted to say. "Thief for not shouting," Lucas finished for her. "You do not need to thank me for that. A man who cannot control his temper around a woman who is clearly frightened by it is no kind of man at all." Emma's eyes widened slightly, and he realized it might be the first time someone had acknowledged her fear directly, without judgment or dismissal. "You noticed," she said. "I noticed," Lucas confirmed. "That day in the saloon, when I came in shouting about the claim jumpers, you flinched like I had raised a hand to you, and I realized that someone, sometime, probably had. I decided right then that I would never give you cause to flinch at me again if I could help it." Tears welled in Emma's eyes, and she blinked them back rapidly. "I am not usually so weak," she said. "I am trying to be stronger, to not let the past affect me so much. But sometimes—" "You are not weak," Lucas interrupted, and his voice was fierce despite its low volume. "You survived something that would have broken a weaker person, and you had the courage to leave and start over in a place where you knew no one. That takes more strength than most people ever have to find. The fact that loud voices make you uncomfortable does not change that." Emma looked up at him with an expression that made his heart clench in his chest. "You are a kind man, Lucas Fletcher," she said, and it was the first time she had used his given name. "Kinder than I thought existed in this world." "Then you have known the wrong kind of men," Lucas said, "and I would like the chance to prove that not all of us are like whoever hurt you." The words hung between them, heavy with implication, and Lucas held his breath waiting for her response. Emma studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes serious and searching, before she finally nodded. "I would like that," she said quietly. "I would like that very much." It was not a declaration of love or even a promise of courtship, but it was a beginning, and Lucas felt something settle in his chest that he had not even realized was anxious. He tipped his hat to her, said goodbye in a voice that was barely above a whisper, and headed back to his ranch with a lightness in his step that had been absent for years. Their courtship, if it could be called that, was unlike any other in St. George's recent memory. Lucas courted Emma in quiet ways, with soft words and careful gestures. He brought her books borrowed from Mrs. Whitmore's lending library, choosing titles he thought she might enjoy, and always asking permission before approaching her. He invited her on walks through town, or out to see the red rock formations that gave the area its distinctive beauty, and he was careful to always stay in public view, where she would feel safe. He never tried to touch her beyond offering his arm when the ground was rough, and even then he waited for her to take it rather than presuming. Emma responded to his gentleness like a flower responding to water after a drought. She began to smile more, to speak more freely, to meet his eyes when they talked. She told him stories about her mother, who had been loving and gentle and had tried her best to protect Emma from her father's rages. She told him about her childhood before things got bad, about summers spent reading under trees and winters spent learning to sew by lamplight. She did not talk much about her father, except in oblique references, and Lucas never pressed her for details he could see caused her pain. He told her about his own childhood, about a mother who had sung to him even when there was no food in the house, about learning to work cattle at an age when most boys were still playing with toys. He told her about the ranch and his dreams for it, about wanting to build something lasting and good that he could be proud of. He told her things he had never told anyone else, and she listened with an attention that made him feel valued in a way he never had before. September arrived with slightly cooler temperatures, and Marcus Vance arrived with increased pressure. Lucas's fence line was cut twice in 1 week, and 15 head of cattle vanished without a trace. He found dead coyotes near his water source, clearly poisoned in an attempt to make him think the water was bad. He knew it was Vance's doing, knew that the man was trying to force his hand, but proving it was another matter entirely. The local sheriff was sympathetic, but powerless without evidence, and Vance was too smart to leave any. Lucas did not tell Emma about the troubles at first, not wanting to burden her with his problems, but she noticed anyway. She noticed that he came to town more often, but stayed for shorter periods, noticed the worry lines that appeared around his eyes, noticed that his clothes were more worn than usual because he was spending money on replacing fencing instead of on himself. "What is wrong?" she asked him one evening when he came into the saloon looking particularly exhausted. It was a quiet night, and she had taken the liberty of sitting at his table, something she would never have dared a month ago. Lucas wanted to lie, wanted to tell her everything was fine, but the concern in her eyes stopped him. "Marcus Vance is trying to run me off my land," he said bluntly. "He is doing it slowly, making it look like accidents and bad luck, but it is deliberate. He wants my property, and he is willing to do whatever it takes to get it." Emma's face went pale. "Can the sheriff not help you?" "Not without proof, and Vance is careful. I am holding on for now, but I am not going to lie to you, Emma. It is getting harder. My cattle numbers are dropping, my expenses are rising, and I am running out of options." "What will you do?" Emma asked, and her voice was steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "Keep fighting," Lucas said simply. "That land is all I have worked for since I was 16 years old. I am not going to let a bully take it from me without a fight." Emma reached across the table and laid her hand over his, the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. Her hand was small and soft against his calloused palm, and Lucas felt the touch all the way to his bones. "Then I will help you," she said. "I do not know what I can do, but there must be something." Lucas turned his hand over and gently squeezed hers, careful not to hold too tight, careful to let her know she could pull away at any moment. "You already help me," he said. "More than you know. Just having someone who cares makes all the difference." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but this time she did not look away or try to hide them. "I do care," she said. "I care about you very much, Lucas. You have been nothing but kind and patient with me, and you have made me feel safe for the first time in longer than I can remember. I do not want to see you lose everything because of a cruel man who does not care who he hurts." "I am not going to lose," Lucas said, and he was not entirely sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. "I cannot. I have too much to fight for now." The meaning behind his words was clear, and Emma's breath caught. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face, and Lucas saw something shift in her expression, something that looked like hope and fear and longing all mixed together. "Lucas," she said, and his name on her lips was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. "I need you to know something. I have never been with a man in that way. My father, he hurt me in many ways, but not that way, thank God. But the violence, the anger, it made me afraid of men in general. I thought I would never be able to trust one, never be able to let one close without fear. But you are different. You have been so patient and gentle with me, and I find myself wanting things I never thought I would want. But I am still afraid sometimes, and I need you to be patient with me still." Lucas brought his other hand up to cover both of hers, holding her gently between his palms. "I will be patient with you for as long as you need," he said. "I am not going anywhere, Emma. I am not going to hurt you or force you or raise my voice at you. I am just going to keep being here, caring about you, and waiting for you to feel safe enough to care about me back." "I already do care about you," Emma whispered. "I am falling in love with you, Lucas Fletcher, and it terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure." Lucas felt his heart stutter in his chest. He wanted to pull her into his arms, wanted to kiss her until neither of them could breathe, wanted to shout his joy from the rooftops. Instead, he sat very still and spoke very softly. "I am falling in love with you too," he said. "Have been for weeks now, if I'm being honest. You are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I count myself lucky every day that you are willing to give me a chance." Emma smiled then, a real smile that lit up her entire face, and Lucas thought he would do anything to see that smile again. They sat there holding hands across the table until Mr. Donnelly came over to remind Emma that she had other customers waiting, and even then Lucas was reluctant to let her go. The courtship became more open after that. Lucas started walking Emma home from the saloon every night after her shift ended, and they would stand outside her door talking quietly until the moon rose high overhead. He kissed her for the first time on a cool October evening, and he made sure to ask permission first, made sure she knew she could say no without consequence. She said yes, and the kiss was soft and sweet and perfect. When they pulled apart, Emma was crying again, but this time she was smiling too. "No one has ever asked before," she said. "My father certainly never asked before he raised a hand to me. I never knew it was possible for a man to be so considerate." Lucas wiped her tears away with gentle thumbs. "That is how it should always be," he said. "A woman should never have to fear the man who claims to care for her. I promise you, Emma, I will spend the rest of my life proving that not all men are like your father." "I know," Emma said. "I already know, Lucas. You have shown me that every day since the moment you chose to lower your voice because you saw me flinch. That was the moment I started to believe that maybe there were good men in this world, after all." October brought cooler weather and increased problems. Marcus Vance had apparently grown tired of subtle sabotage and decided to escalate his tactics. Lucas came home one evening to find his barn on fire, and it was only through luck and hard work that he managed to save his horses. The barn itself was a total loss, and with it went most of his hay stores for the winter. The sheriff agreed it was arson, but still could not prove Vance's involvement, despite everyone in town knowing exactly who was responsible. Lucas was at his lowest point when Emma came to him with a proposition. He had been avoiding her for 3 days, too ashamed to let her see how close he was to losing everything. But she tracked him down at the ruins of his barn and stood there in her worn dress and borrowed coat until he finally acknowledged her presence. "Go home, Emma," he said wearily. "This is not your fight, and I do not want you anywhere near this mess." "It is my fight if I say it is," Emma replied, and there was steel in her voice he had never heard before. "You stood by me when I was scared and alone. You changed the way you spoke and moved just to make me feel safe. Do you really think I'm going to abandon you now, when you need someone? I do not want you to see me fail," Lucas said, and his voice cracked on the words. "I am going to lose this place, Emma. I cannot afford to rebuild the barn, and without hay I cannot keep my cattle alive through the winter. Vance has won, and I hate it, but I do not see any way out." Emma crossed the distance between them and took his hands in hers. "Then sell me half the ranch," she said. Lucas stared at her. "What?" "I have been saving money since I arrived in St. George," Emma said. "Every penny I did not need for rent and food, I put away. I have almost $300 hidden in my room. It is not much, but it is enough to buy lumber and hay, enough to get you through the winter. Sell me half the ranch as collateral, and when you can pay me back, we will adjust the arrangement." "Emma, I cannot take your money," Lucas protested. "That is everything you have, everything you have been saving to build a better life for yourself." "I am building a better life for myself," Emma said firmly. "I am building it with you, if you will have me. I love you, Lucas Fletcher. I love you enough to invest in your dreams, in our future together. Let me help you. Let me be your partner in this." Lucas looked into her eyes and saw absolute certainty there, saw a strength that had been hidden beneath layers of fear and pain, but was now shining through clear and bright. He thought about refusing, about sending her away to protect her from the risk of losing everything alongside him, but then he thought about what that refusal would mean, how it would suggest that he did not trust her, or value her judgment, or believe her capable of making her own decisions. Emma had spent too much of her life being controlled by a man who claimed to know what was best for her. Lucas was not going to be another man who did the same thing. "All right," he said, "but we do this properly, with papers and witnesses and everything legal. And Emma, if I do lose this place, if Vance manages to drive me out despite everything, I want you to know that I will pay you back every penny, even if it takes me the rest of my life. If you lose this place, we will start over somewhere else together," Emma said. "But you are not going to lose, Lucas. We are not going to lose. We are going to fight, and we are going to win, because we have something worth fighting for now." They went to the town lawyer the next day and drew up the paperwork, making Emma a half-owner of the Fletcher ranch. Marcus Vance heard about it within hours, and he was furious. He had been counting on Lucas being alone and vulnerable, had been confident that a single man with no support would eventually break under enough pressure. The fact that Lucas now had a partner, and a woman at that, seemed to enrage him beyond reason. Vance confronted them outside the lawyer's office, his face red with anger, and for a moment Lucas thought the man might actually become violent, right there in the middle of town. Emma stepped slightly behind Lucas, her hand gripping his arm, and Lucas felt her trembling. He wanted to shout at Vance, wanted to tell the man exactly what he thought of bullies who targeted people weaker than themselves. But he remembered Emma's fear and kept his voice level. "The ranch is not for sale, Mr. Vance," Lucas said calmly. "It was not for sale when it was just mine, and it is certainly not for sale now that it belongs to both of us. I suggest you accept that and move on." "You think a woman is going to help you hold that land?" Vance spat. "You think a broken-down little thing like her is going to make any difference at all? I will crush you both, Fletcher. You and your whore can watch everything you think you have built turn to dust." Lucas felt rage rise in his chest like a living thing, felt his hands clench into fists and his vision narrow. No one spoke about Emma that way. No one insulted her or degraded her while he still had breath in his body. He opened his mouth to roar his anger, to put his fist through Vance's sneering face, but then he felt Emma's hand tighten on his arm. She was shaking so hard he could feel it through his coat, could hear her breathing coming fast and shallow, and the sound cut through his fury like a knife through butter. He took a breath, then another, and when he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "You will not speak about Miss Thorne in that manner," he said. "She is a lady and deserves to be treated with respect. As for the ranch, we will see who is still standing when winter ends. Good day, Mr. Vance." He turned and walked away, keeping Emma close to his side, and he did not look back even when Vance shouted something else after them. They walked in silence until they were out of sight of the lawyer's office, and then Emma pulled him into the alley between the general store and the church and burst into tears. "I am sorry," she sobbed. "I am so sorry, Lucas. You should have defended yourself, should have told him what you really thought, but I ruined it by being weak and frightened, and now he thinks he can say whatever he wants to us without consequence." Lucas gathered her carefully into his arms, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wanted, but she pressed herself against his chest instead and cried like her heart was breaking. He stroked her hair and murmured soft reassurances, and felt his own eyes sting with sympathetic tears. "You are not weak," he told her firmly, "and you did not ruin anything. I did not hit Vance or shout at him, because that is not who I want to be anymore. I want to be the kind of man who can stay calm in the face of insults, who can walk away from a fight because he has something more important to protect. You did not make me weak, Emma. You made me stronger. You made me better." "He called me terrible things," Emma whispered, "and you just let him." "No," Lucas said. "I defended you in the way that mattered, with words and dignity instead of fists and anger. And later, when this is all over, and Vance has slunk back to Colorado with his tail between his legs, everyone in this town will remember that I treated you with respect while he acted like a brute. They will remember that I was strong enough to stay calm, and he was weak enough to resort to insults. You did not cost me anything, Emma. You gave me everything." Emma pulled back just enough to look up at his face, her eyes red from crying, but clear. "How did you get to be so wise?" she asked. "I am not wise," Lucas said. "I am just a man who loves you and wants to be worthy of that love. If that means learning to control my temper and speak softly instead of shouting, then it is a small price to pay." Emma reached up and touched his face with gentle fingers. "I love you so much," she said. "I love you enough that it scares me sometimes. I never thought I could feel this way about anyone." "I know the feeling," Lucas said, and then he kissed her right there in the alley in broad daylight. Propriety be damned. When they finally broke apart, Emma was smiling again, and Lucas counted that as the only victory he needed. November and December passed in a blur of hard work and constant vigilance. Lucas used Emma's money to buy lumber and rebuild the barn, though this time he built it with stone foundations and a water barrel on the roof in case of another fire. He bought hay and feed for the cattle, though he had to pay premium prices because of the season. Emma continued working at the saloon, but she spent every spare moment at the ranch, helping with whatever needed doing. She learned to cook for ranch hands, learned to mend tack and bridles, learned 1,000 small skills that made her an invaluable partner. Vance made several more attempts at sabotage, but Lucas was ready for him now. He hired 2 ranch hands from town, men who had no love for Vance and were happy to help keep watch at night. He also made a point of documenting every incident, every cut fence and poisoned water source, building a case that the sheriff could not ignore forever. The evidence piled up slowly but steadily, and by the time winter truly set in, even Vance seemed to realize that his tactics were not working. Christmas came and went quietly. Lucas gave Emma a locket with his photograph inside, and she gave him a new shirt she had sewn herself from fabric she could not really afford. They spent the day at the ranch, just the 2 of them, and Lucas taught Emma how to ride his gentler horse. She was terrified at first, but she trusted him enough to try, and by the time the sun set, she was cantering around the corral with a look of pure joy on her face. Lucas watched her and thought his heart might burst from happiness. "I want to marry you," he said that evening as they sat by the fire in his small house. The words came out before he had consciously decided to say them, but once they were spoken, he did not want to take them back. Emma looked up from the sewing in her lap, her eyes wide. "What?" "I want to marry you," Lucas repeated. "I know it is fast. I know we have only really been courting for a few months, but Emma, I cannot imagine my life without you now. You have made me better in every way. You have given me something to fight for beyond just land and cattle. You have shown me what it means to love someone and be loved in return. I want to spend the rest of my life being the man you deserve, being the partner you need. Will you marry me?" Emma set down her sewing with trembling hands. "Are you certain?" she asked. "I come with so much baggage, Lucas. So many fears and wounds that may never fully heal. I may always flinch at loud voices, may always have moments where the past comes back to haunt me. Are you really prepared to deal with that for the rest of your life?" "I am not just prepared," Lucas said. "I am honored. Emma, you are the strongest person I know. The fact that you have wounds does not make you broken. It makes you human. And yes, you may always flinch at loud voices, but I will just keep speaking softly. You may have moments where the past haunts you, but I will be there to remind you that you are safe now, that you are loved now. I am not asking you to be perfect. I am asking you to be mine." Tears streamed down Emma's face, but she was smiling through them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Lucas Fletcher. I will marry you and spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of the faith you have placed in me." "You do not need to prove anything," Lucas said as he pulled her into his arms. "You are already more than enough, exactly as you are." They were married in February of 1884 in the small church in St. George with Mrs. Whitmore and half the town in attendance. Emma wore a dress she had sewn herself from the blue calico she had been looking at the day Lucas apologized for frightening her, and she carried wildflowers that Lucas had ridden 20 miles to find because they were her favorite. Lucas wore his best suit and polished his boots until they shone, and when the preacher asked if he took Emma to be his wife, his "I do" rang out clear and strong through the church. Emma's "I do" was quieter, but no less heartfelt, and when Lucas kissed his wife for the first time, there was not a dry eye in the congregation. Even the sheriff was wiping at his face, though he tried to disguise it as allergies. The reception was held at Mrs. Whitmore's boarding house, and it seemed like everyone in St. George had brought food or gifts. Lucas and Emma were overwhelmed by the generosity, by the way the community had embraced them both and celebrated their union. It was everything Emma had never had growing up, and everything Lucas had always wanted. A sense of belonging and family that went beyond blood ties. Marcus Vance did not attend, but his absence was a gift in itself. Lucas had heard through the grapevine that Vance was having trouble with his own ranch, that several of his best hands had quit after witnessing his treatment of the animals, and that the bank was starting to ask questions about some of his business practices. It seemed that karma was finally catching up with the man, and Lucas felt no sympathy whatsoever. Emma moved into the ranch house after the wedding, and Lucas made sure to give her time and space to adjust to married life. He had promised to be patient, and he kept that promise even on their wedding night. They slept in the same bed, but Lucas held her, and nothing more, waiting for her to indicate she was ready for more. It took 3 weeks, but finally one night Emma turned to him in the darkness and kissed him with an urgency that told him she was done waiting. "Are you certain?" Lucas asked, even as his body responded to her touch. "We do not have to rush anything, Emma. I meant what I said about patience." "I am certain," Emma whispered. "I want this, Lucas. I want you. I am tired of letting fear control my life, tired of letting the past rob me of the present. I love you, and I trust you, and I want to be your wife in every way." Lucas made love to his wife slowly and carefully, paying attention to every gasp and whimper, ready to stop at the first sign of fear or discomfort. But there was no fear in Emma that night, only love and trust and a building passion that matched his own. Afterward, she cried again, but this time the tears were happy ones. "I never knew it could be like that," she said. "I always thought it would hurt, that it would be something to endure rather than enjoy. But with you, it was beautiful." "It will always be beautiful between us," Lucas promised, because it comes from love and trust, not anger or control. I will never hurt you, Emma. Not in that way or any other way I can prevent. Spring came early to St. George that year, and with it came vindication. The sheriff finally had enough evidence to arrest Marcus Vance for arson, cattle theft, and destruction of property. The trial was held in March, and Lucas and Emma both testified about the harassment and threats they had endured. Vance was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison, and his ranch was sold to pay his debts and the restitution he owed to Lucas and the other ranchers he had victimized. Lucas and Emma used the restitution money to buy more cattle and another 100 acres adjacent to their existing land. The Fletcher Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, growing from a struggling operation to one of the most successful in the territory. They hired more hands, built a bigger barn, and even added a proper kitchen to the house at Emma's request. But more than the material prosperity, their marriage flourished. Lucas never forgot the promise he had made to himself that day in the saloon. Never raised his voice around Emma, even when he was frustrated or angry about something. It became second nature to him, speaking softly and calmly regardless of the situation, and he found that it improved all his relationships, not just the one with his wife. The ranch hands respected him for his even temper. Business associates found him easy to negotiate with, and Emma blossomed under his gentle care. Emma's fears did not disappear overnight, but they faded over time. She still flinched occasionally at unexpected loud noises, still had moments where the past threatened to overwhelm her, but Lucas was always there to provide comfort and reassurance. And as the years passed, those moments became fewer and farther between, replaced by confidence and joy, and a deep contentment that came from being truly, completely loved. Their first child was born in December of 1884, a son they named William Thomas Fletcher. Lucas held his son for the first time, with tears streaming down his face, overcome by the realization that he was now responsible for this tiny life, that he had the power to shape this child's future through his words and actions. He made a vow right then to be the father his own had never been, to show William through example what it meant to be a good man. Emma was a natural mother, patient and loving, and endlessly creative in keeping William entertained as he grew. She sang to him the same songs her own mother had sung to her, taught him his letters with a gentleness that had Lucas falling in love with her all over again. William grew up knowing only love and security, never witnessing violence or raised voices, and he developed into a confident, happy child who brought joy to everyone who met him. Their second child, a daughter named Grace Elizabeth Fletcher, arrived in August of 1886. She had Emma's blue eyes and Lucas's dark hair, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped completely around her tiny finger. Lucas had thought he knew what love was before Grace arrived, but holding his daughter for the first time expanded his capacity for love in ways he had not imagined possible. The Fletcher Ranch continued to grow and prosper through the late 1880s. They built a new house, larger and more comfortable than the original homestead, with a wide porch where Emma could sit and watch the children play, and a study where Lucas could manage the books and paperwork that came with running a successful operation. They added sheep to their livestock, diversifying their income, and Lucas even bought a few horses specifically for breeding, hoping to develop a line of cow ponies that would be in demand throughout the territory. But the real measure of their success was not in acres or cattle or dollars. It was in the peace they had built together, in the home that was filled with laughter instead of fear, in the way William and Grace grew up, never doubting that they were loved and valued. It was in the way Emma smiled now, freely and often, with no shadows lingering in her eyes. It was in the way Lucas had learned that true strength came not from volume or force, but from gentleness and patience. Mrs. Whitmore, who had become like a grandmother to the Fletcher children, commented on it one day when she came to visit. "I have never seen two people more perfectly suited to each other," she said, as she watched Lucas playing with the children in the yard. "You both brought out the best in one another, turned pain and fear into something beautiful." "He saved me," Emma said quietly. "The day he saw me flinch and decided to change the way he spoke, that was the day my real life began. Everything before that was just survival." "You saved each other," Mrs. Whitmore corrected. "He gave you safety and gentleness, and you gave him purpose and love. That is what the best marriages are built on, the mutual lifting up of one another." Emma smiled and nodded, watching her husband swing Grace through the air while William clung to his leg, begging for his turn. "I never thought I could be this happy," she admitted. "I spent so long being afraid, being broken, that I forgot what it felt like to hope for something better." Lucas reminded me. He showed me that not all men use their strength to hurt, that some use it to protect. He gave me back my life. "And you gave him a reason to be the man he always wanted to be," Mrs. Whitmore said. "Do not sell yourself short, my dear. Love is not a one-way street. You have both contributed equally to what you have built here." The years rolled on peacefully. William grew tall and serious, with his father's steady nature and his mother's gentle heart. Grace was more spirited, full of laughter and mischief, but even at her most rambunctious, she never felt the sting of harsh words or raised voices. The Fletcher children grew up in a home where disagreements were settled through discussion, where feelings were acknowledged and respected, where love was expressed freely and often. In 1889, Emma gave birth to their third child, another son they named James Robert Fletcher. His arrival was easier than the first two, and Emma recovered quickly, eager to be back to her full routine. James was a quiet baby, content to observe the world around him with solemn gray eyes that reminded Lucas of his own mother, and Lucas felt a special connection to his youngest son from the beginning. The Fletcher Ranch was now one of the largest and most successful operations in southern Utah, and Lucas was recognized throughout the territory as a fair and honest businessman. He served on the town council, helped establish a school in St. George, and donated generously to the church and to Mrs. Whitmore's charitable efforts. But he never forgot where he had come from, never forgot the lessons he had learned from loving Emma. There was one incident in particular that cemented Lucas's reputation in St. George. A new family moved to town in 1891, and the father was a loud, aggressive man who drank too much and terrorized his wife and children. Lucas witnessed the man shouting at his wife in the street one day, saw the woman flinch and cower exactly the way Emma had once done, and something in him snapped. But instead of responding with anger or violence, Lucas approached the man calmly and quietly. He invited him to the ranch to talk, man to man, and over the course of several hours, Lucas told his story. He talked about his own father's drinking, about the fear and pain it had caused. He talked about meeting Emma and realizing how much damage could be done by harsh words and raised voices. He talked about learning to control his temper, to speak softly even when he wanted to shout, and how that choice had transformed his entire life. The man listened, and something in Lucas's words must have struck a chord because he started attending the church-run meetings for men who struggled with anger and alcohol. It was a slow process, and there were setbacks, but over time the man's behavior improved. His wife stopped flinching, his children stopped looking afraid, and the whole family began to heal. Lucas never took credit for it, but Emma knew the role he had played, and she loved him all the more for using his own painful experiences to help someone else. By 1895, William was 11 years old and already helping with the ranch work, learning cattle management and horsemanship from his father. Grace was 9 and more interested in books and learning than in ranch work, so Emma taught her to read advanced texts and encouraged her intellectual curiosity. James was 6 and still finding his place in the world, alternating between following his brother around and clinging to his mother's skirts. The Fletcher family had become an integral part of St. George, respected and loved by everyone who knew them. Their home was known for its hospitality, their door always open to neighbors in need. Emma had completely shed the fearful girl she had been when she arrived in Utah, transformed into a confident woman who ran her household with competence and grace. She served on the church committees, organized social events, and was the first person anyone called when there was trouble. But despite all the success and respect, the thing Lucas treasured most was the quiet moments, the evenings when he and Emma would sit on the porch after the children were in bed, holding hands and watching the sun set over the red rocks. The mornings when he would wake to find Emma already up, making breakfast while humming one of her mother's old songs. The afternoons when he would come in from working cattle to find his children playing peacefully, their laughter filling the house with joy. One evening in the spring of 1896, Lucas and Emma celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary. The children were staying overnight with Mrs. Whitmore, giving their parents a rare evening alone. They ate dinner by candlelight, talking about everything and nothing, reminiscing about their courtship and marveling at how far they had come. "Do you remember the day we met?" Emma asked. Or rather, the day you really saw me for the first time? I remember, Lucas said. I stormed into the saloon like a fool, shouting about claim jumpers, and you flinched like I had struck you. I saw your face and I knew, right then, that someone had hurt you badly. It made me angrier than anything Vance ever did to me. I thought you would be like my father, Emma admitted. When I first saw you, tall and loud and angry, I thought you were just another man who used violence to get what he wanted. But then you left, and the next time I saw you, you spoke so softly, so gently. You asked permission before approaching me. You gave me space to breathe. That was the moment I started to trust you. I decided that day that I would never give you reason to flinch at me again, Lucas said. It seemed like such a small thing at the time, just lowering my voice and being mindful of my movements. But it changed everything. Did it not? It changed us. It changed me, Emma corrected. You showed me what a good man looks like, what real strength is. Not shouting or violence, but patience and gentleness, and the ability to control yourself, even when you are angry. You saved my life, Lucas, not in some dramatic rescue way, but in the quiet, everyday way that actually matters. You made me feel safe enough to live again. Lucas reached across the table and took her hand. You saved me too, he said. I was so angry when we met, so bitter about my father and my childhood, and the way Vance was trying to take everything from me. You gave me something worth fighting for, beyond just pride and land. You showed me that being strong enough to be gentle was more valuable than being tough enough to fight. We saved each other, Emma. That is what the best partnerships do. They spent the rest of the evening dancing in the living room to music only they could hear, holding each other close and swaying in time to the beating of their hearts. When they finally went to bed, Lucas held Emma the way he had on their wedding night, and she fell asleep with her head on his chest, completely secure in the knowledge that she was loved and cherished and safe. The years continued to pass in a blur of happiness and hard work. William left home in 1900 to study animal husbandry at a college in Salt Lake City, though he promised to return to the ranch once his education was complete. Grace followed 2 years later, accepted into a teaching program in Denver. James stayed on the ranch, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day management as Lucas approached 50 and began to slow down slightly. Emma's hair turned gray at the temples, and Lucas developed permanent laugh lines around his eyes from smiling so much. They grew old together gracefully, still holding hands on the porch, still dancing in the living room, still speaking to each other in the soft, gentle tones that had become their trademark. The passion of their youth mellowed into a deep, abiding love that needed no words, that communicated through glances and touches, and the comfortable silence of two people who had shared everything. In 1910, William returned to St. George with a wife of his own, a kind woman named Sarah, who fit seamlessly into the Fletcher family. They took over one section of the ranch, building their own house nearby, and soon gave Lucas and Emma their first grandchild, a boy named Lucas Jr. Emma cried when she held her grandson for the first time, overwhelmed by the circle of life, by the realization that she and Lucas had not only healed themselves, but had created a legacy of love and gentleness that would continue through their children and grandchildren. Grace also married to a teacher she met in Denver, and though she did not return to St. George permanently, she visited often with her husband and eventually their 3 daughters. James married a local girl, the daughter of the sheriff who had helped them build the case against Marcus Vance all those years ago, and they remained on the ranch, continuing the work Lucas had started. By 1915, Lucas and Emma were in their 50s, and the Fletcher Ranch was now run primarily by their children, though Lucas still consulted on major decisions, and Emma still managed the household accounts with meticulous care. They had 7 grandchildren between them, and their house was often filled with the sound of young voices and laughter. One evening, sitting on the porch they had built together more than 20 years earlier, Emma turned to Lucas with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" Lucas asked, though he suspected he knew. "For everything," Emma said. "For seeing me that day in the saloon, for choosing to change, to lower your voice, to be patient with me when I was so broken I could barely function, for loving me through my fears and helping me become the woman I always wanted to be, for building this life with me, this family, this legacy of love, for showing our children and grandchildren what a good marriage looks like, what real strength is. Thank you for all of it. Lucas pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head, the way he had done 1,000 times before. "Thank you for taking a chance on me," he said. "Thank you for trusting me when you had every reason not to trust any man. Thank you for being my partner and my best friend and the love of my life. Thank you for every day we have had together, and for all the days still to come." They sat there in comfortable silence as the sun set over the red rocks of southern Utah, two people who had found each other at their lowest points and built something beautiful together. Lucas thought about the angry young man he had been when he stormed into that saloon in 1883. Thought about how that single moment of seeing Emma flinch had changed the trajectory of his entire life. Such a small thing, really, deciding to lower his voice. But from that small decision had come everything that mattered, everything he valued, everything he loved. The years rolled on peacefully until 1925, when Lucas Fletcher passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 66. He died as he had lived the last 40 years of his life, peacefully and without violence, surrounded by love. Emma was devastated by his loss, but she took comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. She lived another 8 years, passing away in 1933 at the age of 71, and she was buried next to Lucas in the St. George Cemetery under a simple headstone that read, "Emma Thorne Fletcher, beloved wife and mother. She taught us that love casts out fear." The Fletcher Ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down from James to his children and then to their children, a testament to what two wounded people had built from nothing but determination and love. The story of how Lucas and Emma met, of how he had seen her flinch and decided never to raise his voice around her again, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of how small acts of kindness and consideration can change lives. William's grandson, researching the family history in the 1960s, found Emma's old diary from her first years in St. George, and in it she had written about that day in the saloon. "Today I saw a man storm into the saloon in a rage, and I was so frightened I could barely breathe. But then he looked at me, really looked at me, and something in his face changed. When I saw him next, he spoke so softly I had to strain to hear him, and I realized he had changed his behavior because he had seen my fear. In that moment, I began to believe that maybe not all men were monsters. Maybe some were capable of kindness and gentleness. Maybe I could have a future after all." The diary entry was dated July 1883, just a few days after that fateful afternoon. Emma had recorded many other entries over the years, documenting their courtship, their marriage, the births of their children, and the building of their life together. But that first entry, about Lucas choosing to lower his voice, was the one that William's grandson treasured most, because it showed the exact moment when his great-grandmother's life had begun to change, when fear had started to give way to hope. The Fletcher family continued to honor Lucas and Emma's memory by living according to the principles they had established. Disagreements were settled calmly, children were raised with gentleness and patience, and the words, "I love you," were spoken freely and often. The ranch prospered through good times and bad, through droughts and floods, and the changing economics of the 20th century, because it was built on a foundation of love and mutual respect that proved stronger than any obstacle. And so, the story of Lucas Fletcher and Emma Thorne became more than just a romance, more than just a tale of two people who fell in love in the Wild West. It became a lesson in how we choose to treat each other, how small acts of consideration and kindness can ripple forward through generations, how deciding to speak softly instead of shouting can change not just one life, but many lives to come. It became a testament to the power of love, to heal old wounds, to transform pain into beauty, to build something lasting and good from the broken pieces of the past. In St. George, Utah, where the red rocks still stand, eternal watch over the valley, and the summers are still blazingly hot, there is a historical marker at the site where the Fletcher Ranch once stood. It tells the basic facts of Lucas and Emma's lives, the dates and the details of their successful ranching operation. But it does not tell the real story, the one that matters most. It does not tell about a frightened woman who flinched at a raised voice, or about a man who saw her fear and decided to change. It does not tell about the slow building of trust, the patient courtship, the gentle love that healed them both. It does not tell about the family they raised together, the legacy they left behind, The way their choice to love each other, despite their wounds, created ripples that spread far beyond themselves. But the descendants of Lucas and Emma Fletcher know the story. They tell it to their children and their children's children, keeping it alive through the generations. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right across the Utah desert, stirring up dust from the red rocks and carrying the scent of sage across the valley, you can almost hear their voices, soft and gentle, speaking words of love that echo through the ages, reminding us all that true strength comes not from volume or violence, but from the courage to be kind, to be patient, to choose gentleness even when anger would be easier. Lucas Fletcher saw Emma Thorne flinch at his shouting, and he never raised his voice around her again. From that single choice came a lifetime of love, a family built on respect and tenderness, and a legacy that would endure long after they were both gone. It was, in the end, the only thing that really mattered, not the acres or the cattle or the success of the ranch, but the love they shared and the example they set, showing everyone who knew them that sometimes the quietest voices speak the loudest truths, and sometimes the greatest strength is found in gentleness. Their love story became the foundation upon which their descendants built their own lives, each generation learning from Lucas and Emma's example that love requires patience, that healing takes time, that the choice to be gentle is one that must be made again and again, every single day. And because of that choice, because Lucas saw Emma's pain and decided to change his behavior rather than expect her to simply get over her fear, they created something beautiful and lasting that transcended their own lives and became a light for everyone who came after them. The Wild West was known for its violence and its harsh justice, for gunfights and outlaws and men who took what they wanted by force. But in a small town in southern Utah, one man and one woman proved that there was another way, a better way, built on respect and kindness and the quiet strength that comes from choosing love over anger. Their story reminds us that we all have the power to change someone's life through our actions, that seeing someone's pain and choosing to respond with compassion rather than judgment can be the beginning of something transformative. Lucas and Emma Fletcher lived their truth every day of their marriage, and in doing so, they gave their children and grandchildren, and all who came after them, a roadmap for how to love well, how to treat each other with dignity and respect, how to build something lasting from the ashes of the past. And that, in the end, is the truest measure of a life well lived and a love story worth telling.